This is Dr. Rich Schuttler with lesson number 5 in chapter 4 of how to write your chapter 4 in your dissertation. This is lesson part 3 of 5 relating to qualitative themes. In this lesson, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from the other strategy and give you some insights, perhaps on things you wish you learned in your research courses. This is taking the B out of ABD program, which stands for taking the butt out of all but dissertations. And I'm Dr. Rich Schuttler, and I'm going to give you some insights today that perhaps if you're listening to this lesson strategy early before you are actually through all your research courses, this will help you remember even more when you're in those classes and maybe ask related questions. If you're already through your research courses, then perhaps these ideas I'm going to share here in this lesson will give you some thoughts to go and look into the research books more and maybe ask your dissertation chair better questions about. In the lesson strategy for the 12 lessons I have planned for Chapter 4, you'll see here, as I just noted, this is lesson number 5 of 12. You can see the 4 lessons I've addressed already to include part 1 and part 2 of qualitative themes. Once I'm done with this lesson, I'll have 2 more parts still related to qualitative themes before I get into the quantitative themes, and then some insights and information about the introduction and conclusion sections to your Chapter 4, and then a wrap up on all the chapter lessons. In today's lesson plan, I'm going to address things you wish you learned in your research courses. I'll give you 3 examples of things I refer to in the lesson strategy from my mentees, and then I'll conclude with a reflective summary. So get your pen and paper handy, take some notes, and of course, if you don't take notes, the good thing is you can always replay this lesson over and over as often as you want to help you learn the information to a greater degree. The first item I want to talk about is more sooner on each qualitative design. One of the things I wish I could do with doctorate students is give them specific 8-week courses on individual research designs, particularly in qualitative. I'd like to have a whole course just on case study, a whole course on phenomenology, and every other design that's in a qualitative method. The reason I say this is because all too often, and I was a perfect example, when I started to get into doing my dissertation, I did not understand the research designs well enough. The better you understand your research design, the easier it's going to be to do the work. The most important thing, as I'll talk in other points on this lesson, is that you must build some level of expertise in your research design. That will help you to first articulate your central research questions correctly. Then, if you're going to have sub-questions, on how to write those effectively, and then how to design your interview questions. If you fully understand the research design, then it's easier to write everything, and then of course it's even easier to go do the research because you have done the work, you have done the plan, you'll be putting into effect. More sooner on each design. And if you're through your research courses, then I encourage you to start reading maybe 10 pages a day on your research design. Get books by the experts in those designs and learn more and more about the designs. Look at different research studies, not necessarily just articles, but actual research studies that have applied your same qualitative design. This also includes dissertations that were published recently from your university. Read as much as you can, build up the expertise, learn how other people have done their research, how they've written their central research question or questions, if they've had sub-questions, how they wrote those, how they wrote and tested their interview questions, and then do the same for your work. The next point is the wording of central research questions, and this goes back to the first item, that if you do not know your research design well enough, you will not know how to write your central research questions. For example, in phenomenology, ideally what we look for is lived experiences. Now, you may have one central research questions on what are the lived experiences of the people you want to interview who are experiencing the certain phenomena. That's fine. But you may also want to have central research questions that only ask about assumptions or beliefs. You wouldn't want to ask questions in a phenomenology design to ask about people describing what they experience, because that might be more related to a descriptive case study. There are certain words that go along with the context of your research design. This is one of the reasons why we do field tests, to make sure that the central research questions and the interview questions are all aligned to your research design. This is critical. You could ask literally the wrong interview questions and have your central research questions written incorrectly to your design and make your entire dissertation not valid. Now, we don't want that to happen. So make sure you pay attention and learn the vocabulary that's related to your research design so you can get the central research question or questions correct. Then any sub-questions that you may have that align to the central research questions, and then the interview questions that align to sub-questions, and then the central research questions. There should be complete alignment, and this is what we talk about when you hear from your committee members, is the research method and design aligned throughout the study. This is just one area that we look at in the word choices of questions. The next area is the perspective on using sub-questions. All too often in research courses, the ones I've been in, and some of the ones I teach, we don't go deep enough into the perspectives on using sub-questions. And here's an example. You may have, as I mentioned a few moments ago on the last slide, that phenomenological design, and you want to ask about lived experiences. Well, within lived experiences, we look for assumptions, beliefs, and perceptions. Now, if you only had one central research question on what are the lived experiences, you may have sub-questions that ask specifically about what are the assumptions, beliefs, and perceptions. Now, you don't have to have sub-questions. You could have interview questions that each ask about assumptions, beliefs, and perceptions, and still get to the same place with the data that you had, whether you had the sub-questions or not. It's all going to be decided upon you and your dissertation chair how to have your questions designed, whether you're going to have sub-questions or not. And then if you do have sub-questions, you're going to analyze the interview data a little bit differently than if you did not have sub-questions. I encourage you to understand fully the rationale for including sub-questions as part of your central research questions in your study. There is no, what I believe to be right or wrong answer. It's more about preference, and in some cases it is dependent upon what you want to study. If you only want to study somebody's assumptions, that's different than also wanting to learn about their beliefs and their perceptions. So therefore, your design would be different if you're looking for something narrow and not necessarily their full lived experiences in many different ways in regards to that phenomena. Now, a case study is even different than a phenomenology. I don't believe that I could come up with any really good reason why a student should have a sub-question in a case study. A case study is more broader. You want to explore what happened or have people describe a situation or whatever this problem is that's being addressed by the dissertation. That's not to say you couldn't have sub-questions. This is where, for some students, it gets to be concerning because maybe one committee member wants sub-questions and one does not. This is up to you then to decide what's best, and the best way to do that is to make sure you have a full understanding of what your research design is and what the options are that are going to serve your study the best. Things you wish you learned: how to write aligning interview questions. It's amazing how so many students will ask questions in what will be their interview questions that do not align with the research design. Oftentimes, even in qualitative work, early drafts, I'll see what we call binary response questions. That means somebody's going to answer yes or no, right or wrong, one way or the other way. In of itself, that's not ideal because nobody's going to elaborate. We don't want just yes or no questions, because then what are you going to do? Average out how many said yes, or percentage-wise how many said no? If you have that kind of question, then you should follow up with, please explain why they answered yes or no, right or wrong, good or bad. That way you get that rich narrative response that we're looking for in qualitative work. But you could also ask interview questions that align with a different design than you are applying to your dissertation. And believe me, this happens far too often. I literally have seen dissertations where somebody wanted to do a case study, but all their interview questions, or the majority of their interview questions, were phenomenological based. That actually hurt the student's effort to produce a dissertation. Again, this goes back to the critical point of everything that I and pretty much every faculty member in your dissertation process has probably underscored: the need to fully understand your research design and how to align it through your work. Again, this is one of the reasons why there are field tests done. Field tests are done with 3 to 5 experts in your research design to make sure that your central research question, and if you have sub-questions, as well as your interview questions, are all aligned to produce the type of data you need for your design. Field test versus pilot study. I wish I would have learned this not only when I did my dissertation, but within the first 5 or 6 years after I did my dissertation and was already a dissertation chair. A field test is designed to help one have experts in research. Experts meaning somebody who actually teaches classes in that design or has been deemed by somebody else to be an expert in research methods and designs. The point being is that these people would look at your study before it ever goes to university approval to make sure that your central research questions and or sub-questions with your interview questions are all aligned to your research design. A field test is done with 3 to 5 experts in research. Now, with my mentees, I encourage them to go find people who are not on their committee and look for people who are approved by a university to teach such a course. If, for example, you're doing a case study, then you should look for people who are case study certified. Now, just because somebody can teach a quantitative correlation class does not necessarily make them an expert in case study research. You want to make sure that they're approved to teach the type of research design that you have, or find some other way to consider them an expert. Perhaps they have published 3 or 5 different research studies in that same research design. Maybe they wrote a book about it. Maybe that book is being used in different research courses. There's different ways to identify who are experts. You just have to tell us what method you used to help ensure that those people who were part of your field test were certified experts. A pilot study tends to be more popular with quantitative research in that the study questionnaire, the Likert type questions, would be given to a number of people who are qualified in the survey population to review the questions to make sure that the individual questions make sense from the user perspective, so that when other people in the survey population get the Likert type survey, that they'll be able to understand the questions. Now, here's an example. I did a pilot study with my Likert type questions for my supervisor leadership and communication inventory, which is a survey that's based off my book, The Laws of Communication. When I did the pilot test, I gave it to 10 people who were part of and qualified to be in the survey population. Through their review of my questions, they didn't actually answer the questions for me to calculate anything. They just read each question to make sure they made sense. I found that some of my questions had what I call too much American slang, and people who have English as a second language did not understand all the questions. So I learned from that to revise my questions to be more specific, more succinct, and clear for everybody to understand whether English was their first or second language. The value of that pilot study is that experts in that area of the people who are qualified to give me self-reporting survey responses were able to give me feedback and said that, if I don't understand this, probably nobody else is going to understand this. Now, the difference being between a field test and a pilot study is that the field tests are research experts. A pilot study are those who are qualified in that survey population to do the surveys for you. Now, anybody who's involved in a pilot study should then be excluded from giving surveys that they're going to be completed to actually run your data, because they've already seen the questions one time. It wouldn't be fair for them to be part of the survey population. You should know what a field test is and what a pilot study is. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, not a lot of faculty who do dissertation research mentoring understand fully the field test, and therefore often have students doing qualitative work doing a pilot study. I used to do that myself because I didn't know, but I learned over the years, and this is something that you just need to be aware of. You should know the distinct differences between a field test and a pilot study. If you do, even if you go to your dissertation chair and say you want to run a field test and they say no, don't do that, you can tell them why you want to do it and give them examples, and then decide what's best for you based on the guidance you're given. I certainly am not advocating that you argue with your dissertation chair, but make sure that all the different approaches are discussed and then logically one is followed. The next thing I'd like to address is interviewing techniques. I think more students do more harm interviewing than anything else because they do not understand how to get involved with being an interviewer. Sometimes as an interviewer, when I'm giving questions to somebody, I have to remember just to be quiet and let people answer. Oftentimes when you ask somebody a question, there might be a little bit of quiet time because they're thinking of the answer. And you might think that, gee, that maybe I didn't ask the question the correct way. Well, oftentimes you have to learn the skills of interviewing. I always encourage people to write a script. Write a script so that every person interviewed gets the same information the same way every time. Reduce the variation. But then also practice interviewing. If you've never interviewed somebody for a job, perhaps in your organization when there's a job opening, or you never interviewed anybody, I encourage you to get some help. If you can, observe somebody else doing interviewing. There are many YouTube videos where you can see a lot of great insights on how to do interviewing. You want to make sure that when you're interviewing, that your technique is adding value to the outcome, not detracting from it. Things you wish you learned about consolidating large amounts of interview responses. I mean, think about it this way. Let's just say, for example, you're going to interview 18 people. And those 18 people, you're going to ask them each 6 individual interview questions. Well, by the time you get done with it and you do the transcriptions, you may have 300 pages of transcripted notes based on that actual interview that you've done with everybody. So how do you manage that? Well, that's part of what you're going to have to deal with. You may have to take all the answers for interview question number 1 for all 18 people and put it into a file. Do the same thing with interview question number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now you can see that's a large amount of data that you're cutting and pasting. Then you have to put each one of those interview questions content from all 18 interviews into in vivo software. Run and find out what all the common themes are. Then you have to do the same thing with interview question number 2 data, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. It can be a huge effort. That's why you want to make sure when you're working with your transcripts from the very beginning as they get transcribed that you're breaking the files down as they need to be. And then you have to run everything, the entire document, what will become later your appendix in your dissertation, through in vivo software and find out what everything means. So there's a lot of manipulation of data as you scope it down from wide to the very narrow to a few themes that you're going to write about. There isn't a lot taught about how to do this, and I wish there was. I wish we had more time to do it. We assume that you're going to be able to do it. And more than likely you'll be able to do it without too much problem. Just before you get into doing your Chapter 4 data analysis, perhaps you thought about this when you were writing Chapter 3 on your data collection and data analysis plan, which is usually part of Chapter 3 in your dissertation proposal, that you already have the process worked out. If you have, great. You should practice the process with your first interview transcripts before you get into doing other interviews. The time to try out your process is not after you've conducted 18 interviews and you have all this data. That would be problematic if your processes are not developed well. So things you wish you would have learned would have been helpful to know even more about consolidating large amounts of interview responses. Another thing I believe would be good to know is how to present Chapter 4 themes and other findings. Oftentimes we just say, well, run everything through in vivo software and find the themes and then write about them. Well, it's not as simple as that, although it's not a lot more complicated. But the idea is Maybe in vivo doesn't work for you well, or you don't truly understand it, and you're trying to struggle about what the different themes are and what supports one as compared to another. And what about these other findings? As I mentioned in the prior lesson, sometimes people will write about what they want to put in chapter 4, not necessarily based on the prioritized frequency of a theme, but perhaps based on the content of what the theme is about, because perhaps that new theme emerged and the body of knowledge is not reflective of that. So therefore, this is something you want everybody to know about as quickly as possible. And you don't want to put it in a lower level theme just because fewer people had generated that theme as compared to some of the other themes where more people had generated. There's an art, probably as much as there is a science, on how to present chapter 4 findings and themes for people to read about. This is why I encourage you, yet again, go to ProQuest Dissertations. Go to your university's most recently published dissertations in your research design, preferably in the last 6 or 12 months. See how others have presented their chapter 4. Find out their approach and then emulate it. The reason you should emulate their approach, because if it was recently approved, that means it's a pattern and a structure that your university supports. Another thing you wish you learned is how to decide exactly what demographic information is needed. I don't necessarily mean in what goes in chapter 4. Sometimes it's also in regards to the questions you ask. Do you want to know whether they're male or female? Do you want to know age ranges specific to perhaps generation, like Generation X, Generation Y? Do you want to know how many years they've worked with the organization? Do you want to know whether they're a frontline worker, a mid-level supervisor, a senior leader? Understanding what kind of data you need might help you later when you want to segment different types of data or to be analyzing your data based on age ranges or male, female, position. Once you truly understand what you want to know, then when you get your demographic data, it's easier to put that information together in chapter 4. Now, one of the things I encourage you to do is you collect all your data from your interviews for chapter 4 that you're going to present all that within, is that look at your demographic data first. Segregate it, put it into the different formats, whether you're using tables and figures, because that should be one of the first early sections in chapter 4 is where you present the data from the demographics. Let that be perhaps how you are testing the waters on how you're going to present data. Again, much like how you're going to present your themes and other information in chapter 4, I think you should have the process completely laid out exactly how you're going to represent the demographic data before you collect your first interview data through that first interview. Understand that the better prepared you are, the chances of you being more successful are in your favor. Another thing I wish I would have learned, and I wish all my mentees would learn, and sometimes I still wish as a dissertation chair I could learn better and more about, is how to work better with different needy committee members. Keep in mind, all your committee members have their own areas of expertise. We each understand research differently than one another in certain ways. Some faculty are going to want far more level of detail than others. Some are going to want you to have sub-questions. Some won't care whether you have sub-questions. And oftentimes the faculty appear as needy because we're trying to help you produce your dissertation in a method that's going to bring great credit upon you, your committee members, and your dissertation. Because everybody wants you to be able to produce work that brings great credit upon yourself, those committee members, and the university as a whole. While it may appear that your faculty are needy, and in some cases we are, but in most cases what we have is what we believe to be an approach that's going to serve your dissertation well and help you get approved. The best thing I can do to help you is to, again, remind you, is to build strong relationships with your committee members all along the way. It's not uncommon that you are working with your dissertation chair probably every week after you've collected your data to start producing Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. There's nothing wrong with bringing in the involvement of your committee members if they want, or as you get a certain question, ask it of them as well. Find out if they have a certain approach on how they want Chapter 4 designed. Do they want the themes in a prioritized frequency order? Is there a certain type of demographic approaches that they want? Are they okay with tables and figures, or do they prefer a narrative? Some faculty do not like extra tables and figures because they don't believe they are needed. And that's okay. But others like to have them because, like me, I believe tables and figures add value to the work. If I looked at every dissertation of the year winner at any university, there usually is a distinction in the breadth and depth and presentation of the content. And those that win tend to have more tables and figures because I believe collectively those tables and figures add value to the collective document. So as you're working with your committee members, keep in mind, first and foremost, they're really there to help you produce a significant, substantial dissertation. They may seem needy, they may appear like they're too busy and don't care about you. I've rarely seen the situation where a faculty member or committee member doesn't care about their mentees, but they also have their own challenges and priorities with work too. Don't be surprised if your dissertation chair turns something around in 2 or 3 days, but a committee member may need 7 or 10 days. Find out, again, how each committee member likes to work, and make sure that you're helping them to truly understand your work from your perspective and what your challenges are. And if you need to, do yourself a favor. Pick up the phone and call them. Text messages and emails and working in class environments is one thing. There's nothing that helps enrich a relationship than a phone call. Now, here are a couple examples from a couple of my mentees, just so you can see what I'm talking about in the lesson strategy here in this particular lesson. Most of my mentees get their work approved on the first pass, and because that they add value, they focus, and I have conditioned them to make sure that they have a certain level of attention to detail, that they write in a very specific and purposeful manner. And each of my mentees have provided me written consent to use their work. They own the copyright. I just own the copyright on my Taking the BAV ABD program, but their information is theirs, and that's why I give their names and dissertation titles, like Dr. Dustin Pollock, who in 2011 graduated, and his dissertation is Phenomenological Study, the Influence of Professional Athletes' Unethical Behavior on Amateur Athletes. Now here, what I'm showing you is merely the table of contents. The reason I'm doing this is twofold. One, so you can see the structure, and also you can see how many pages here. They started on page 68 and ended roughly on page 87. So we're talking roughly, 20 pages for a chapter 4. Doesn't have to be 100 pages for a single chapter. That's not what it's about. It's a design. Look at the structure. First, he introduced, an introduction section, and he gave, information about the research questions, what they were. He gave some information about the pilot study. He gave the demographics of those who were involved in the study, then gave the results and themes, addressed the interview questions, and concluded his study. Now, Dr. Susan Christiniak, who graduated in 2011 with her dissertation titled Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a Qualitative Phenomenological Study. As you can see here on page 88, she started with key word and theme identification. Here you then find questions 1 through 6, and you can see about how much information, a page, page and a half, maybe 2 pages for each of these interview questions that she addressed. Now you can also see the continuation of her work, where not only did she go by the interview questions, but then she shows the major themes. Theme number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And notice, theme number 1, about 6 pages. Theme number 2, we're talking here a couple pages. Theme number 3 starts on page 105, ends about page 109. So you can see, about 3-4 pages for some of these themes, and 2 pages for others. She ends with a summary of the chapter and then concludes the chapter. Now, Dr. Majid Al-Makelbi in 2013 graduated with his dissertation, Perceptions of ICU Stakeholders, that's intensive care unit stakeholders, towards nursing staff levels in Omani hospitals, a qualitative case study. Here you can see his chapter 4 table of contents. It starts on page 64 and ends basically on page 96. Again, you're seeing here that his chapter is about 30 pages long. He's got a little bit more information than the others. His study was a little bit more complex. He actually had hospitals that ranged at, I believe there's 27 hospitals throughout the entire country of Oman. He surveyed every nurse in every hospital. So he had a little bit more complex study, but still, you can see how it's designed. Information about the pilot, gave information about the sample, how the data collection occurred, gave the results, gave the main study, gave a sample of what was found, reliability analysis, and then went in and addressed by research questions. Research question number 1, 2, and 3, and the findings for each of those. Then he concluded with a summary section. Again, as you look at your own work, chapter 4 doesn't have to be 50 or 60 pages. In most cases, probably about 20 or 30 pages is going to serve you well. And the more simpler, or what I call cleaner, the design, the less pages. So if you just have one research question and no sub-questions, you'll probably find that your chapter will be able to have less pages. But the more complex you make your study, it doesn't mean that your work is more complex overall, just that means your chapter 4 might be more complex. I always encourage you to consider what's right for your study. Look at a couple others, see how they approached it, see what's the best for your work based on your dissertation chair's feedback, and make your chapter 4 the best it can possibly be. Now, Dr. James Kaufman, in his 2012 dissertation titled Identification of Multi-Paradigmatic Causal Mechanisms of Industrial Accidents, a case study, provided his chapter 4, as you see here. It started on page 75 and ended roughly on a page 104 by the time he finished his summary. So you're looking at, what, 75, 85, 95, almost 30 pages, yes. So again, you're seeing that they average about 20 to 30 pages. Again, you can see the structure. A brief introduction, give information about the pilot study, give information about the survey population setting on where he found the people that he interviewed, gave the demographics data, addressed the data collection, the data analysis, if you will. Again, all he did was provide the information. He didn't actually analyze it, but he gave how that information came to be. He addressed evidence of trustworthiness because it was more appropriate in his study than perhaps some of the others. Then you see the results and the summary. Here is how he presented his data in his chapter 4. As far as a reflective summary, I addressed things you wish you learned in your research courses. Hopefully, you're listening to this strategy early so you can consider these things as you've gone through your dissertation research courses. Now perhaps you're working on your proposal. If you're already past your proposal and you're actually working on your chapter 4 and chapter 5, take a look at the items I mentioned and see if in fact you should go back into your work and make any changes that are going to help make your chapter 4 even better than it would be otherwise. Then I gave examples from my dissertation mentees who went on to graduate. I hope that you found this lesson helpful on things you wish you would have learned in your research courses. After this lesson, if you're following them in sequence, I'm going to address part 4 of the qualitative data information by giving you a lesson about presenting your data by research questions. I've already given you information about presenting by qualitative themes. Now it's going to be presenting by research questions. There's no one way, and you may find it better and easier to present your data in Chapter 4 by the research questions as compared to presenting it by the themes that were generated. Support and substantiate each theme in Chapter 4, and you'll do fine. You will support that by giving quotes from the actual people you interviewed, because that's what's going to bring your themes and the data that you're presenting to value for other people to learn from. Again, I'm Dr. Rich Shuttler. I'm in Hawaii. I say aloha to you. If you need help, please go to my website at drrichshuttler.com. Take a look under Taking the B out of ABD. If you're early in your program and you're just watching this to prepare for you when you get to Chapter 4, then do yourself a favor. Consider attending one of my weekend workshops on proposal development and get your proposal developed sooner, better, and learn more about the design methods of Chapter 3 so that when you get to Chapter 4, it'll be easier to present your data.